Earlier this year, I began working on a startup. The company is in its very early stages. When I started out, I began looking at resources. Resource after resource told me how to scale, build a business plan, and an investor-worthy pitch. But in all the resources I looked at, none told me about the importance of accessibility when starting a startup. Why in startup culture do we place so much emphasis on finding the customer, but little to no emphasis explaining how disabled people experience our goods and services? I believe it is because when we envision who our customer will be, we see in part a person who is at least a little like ourselves. And this sometimes blindsides us to the other people who are out there who may be experiencing what we design. I couldn't imagine starting a company without accessibility at its center, because as a disabled person who experiences physical obstacles every day, I inherently see the value of accessibility. However, it was equally important for me to work with able-bodied people because their experiences are different to mine and had to be incorporated into our company's vision too. The fact is that society at large has never learnt the value of disabled people. How can we expect innovative ecosystems like startups to learn the value of serving people with access needs if historically people with disabilities have been segregated from mainstream schools, sports teams and dance teams, labelled invalids or called handicapped? And still today, people with disabilities fail to be featured on a significant scale as industry leaders in books, on stage and in movies. How can a founder, leader or developer see my worth as a consumer if all of their reference points don't even really notice me or entirely fail to give me any capabilities? The answer is they can't. The question is, how do we ensure that this changes? How do we show people the value in serving all kinds of consumers? It starts by looking at the numbers. According to Return on Disability, a report out of the United States, the persons with disability market is an emerging market the size of China. Closer to home, 1 in 4 New Zealanders have some sort of disability or impairment. That is, every 4th Tinder swipe, every 4th Uber ride, every 4th Airbnb stay or Facebook post done by a person with a disability. The startup space is defined by innovation. This makes it the perfect place to address universal design and accessibility. There are 1.31 billion people with access needs in the world. We aren't huddled in our homes waiting to be cured. We navigate, contribute to, and experience the same world that you do, and we deserve to be recognized as valuable consumers. The startup space being concerned with accessibility is overdue, and in New Zealand, a country which often leads from the front, we can be the place where accessibility in startups gains prevalence. But what stands in our way? The other day, a stranger in a coffee shop turned to me and he said, "Oh, you're out on your own today?" We still have this view that somebody else will facilitate a disabled person's navigation in the world. And yes, I might always need some help, but to ignore me because you think someone else will pick up the slack is stupid and it misses an opportunity. When I talk about accessibility in a startup company or in any company, I am not asking you to show me your HR policy on diversity and inclusion, and I am not asking you if you have ramps into your office. What I am asking you about is your mindset. If the subject of disability comes up in your office, what is your response? And do you push people to excel, but not try to make them into something they cannot be? Let's get one thing straight though. I don't expect that every environment make way for me. As a disabled person, I adapt and I do so naturally. I have never used my disability as the center of my story because that's boring. It's not about my disability, it's about what I do with it and how I use it to inform my actions. I see my disability as a gift. It has taught me resilience, made me very stubborn, and given me a vision. And these are all great qualities in the startup space. But what I do ask is that you don't see me as less valuable. If you ask me why I get 15 minutes less work done in a day than my peers, it is not because they walk and I do not. It is because the office doesn't have a disabled toilet. So every time I need to use the bathroom, I need to make the trek to McDonald's, which did have its positives because I could stop for a cheeseburger, but it also ended up taking around 15 minutes a day. I don't need to walk in order to have more value to your business, either as a consumer or employee. What I do need is for you to see me just as clearly as you see your normal customer, impending dollar signs, or approaching investors. Because if and when you do make the effort to see me and those like me, I will notice, because accessibility is a form of innovation. A common misconception about disabled people is that we are different, so you need to design something entirely different for us. One day last year, I went Christmas shopping, and the lady behind the counter turned to me and asked, "Can you have children one day?" I'm pretty sure she almost fainted when I told her that I could, because to her, my using a wheelchair meant that the functionality of my reproductive system was entirely dismissed. But the fact of the matter is that I have every right to the same life experiences as anybody else and every ability to pursue those experiences. You don't need to create something entirely different for me. All you need to do is think about different kinds of people when you design in the first place. Make inclusivity a part of your scaling plan. I recently went for an interview which required psychometric testing, and I absolutely bombed it. There was no way that under the time limit I could answer those kind of questions, because at university I get extra time for my exams because of my condition. The question I have is, how can one test, one standard, cater to all kinds of people and their style of thinking? Accessible design is being malleable, understanding that everybody who comes into your door is different and embracing that. Because when we try and standardize people and get them all to answer the same test, we strip them of their identity. A diverse society is an accessible one. Because if we try and fit everybody into the same box, then we are all the same. And what does that really achieve? It doesn't advance us as a society at all. All it does is keep the same cycle going, where people who are different or think differently or come from different backgrounds are made to feel less than because they cannot meet this standard. Accessible design does not mean you have to segregate the market and design for one group over another. It simply means considering how your design can bring the best out of everybody. This makes accessible design the next step toward a truly inclusive society. Entrepreneurs, founders of startups, and members of Gen Z have the power to make anything relevant and cool. We have the power to give accessibility, universal impact, and cultural relevance. I am acutely aware of the monetary struggles of a startup, but accessible design doesn't have to break the bank. If 1 in 4 people in this country have an access need, start by looking in your networks. Get people with disabilities or impairments to trial your design. And if you have questions that you can't find the answer to, ask them to me. And if I can't answer them, I will find someone who can. I did say before that I was happy to adapt. So you might be thinking, why would I bother considering her or people who are different when I'm designing my prototype or my business plan if they're just going to adapt to what I create anyway? And yeah, I suppose you could think like that. Because people like me learned really quickly that in order to succeed, we have to adapt. But our adaptation does not mean that you're off the hook. Our culture has taught young people to assimilate as much as they can to the able-bodied in order to succeed. And you could say that this works. I could rattle off my CV to you and it would be just as good as anybody else's. But why should I have to assimilate? I should be able to go anywhere and be proud to be different. Nevertheless, people like me have learned to succeed through adaptation, but in order to succeed in those environments, we've had to overcome so many obstacles. Some minor, like desks being really high and impossible to reach when you're in a meeting. Some more challenging, like not knowing if there's a disabled toilet and not being able to find anyone who knows where it is. Or having to push yourself up a really steep hill on Great North Road every day. And yet, in the face of these obstacles, I show up. The 1.31 billion people with access needs in the world, we show up. So if we can succeed in the environments that aren't designed for us, imagine what we could do in places that were designed with us in mind. This is why, when I began my career, I decided to do so through an online blog. Because to me, the internet, and as I have now discovered, the wider technology space, is a place that is limitless. It is a place where stereotypes of the tangible world can be broken down, debunked, and replaced by what we design, by what we decide to define ourselves as. And this is so exciting because it means that as technology advances, we are the ones who are put in control and we can independently decide who we will be. Through the internet, I face none of the physical barriers that I do out in the world, but I do still face some obstacles I know can be solved. So it is now my mission to create an entirely accessible online space. So let me ask you, do you have a mission and are you communicating it in everything you do? Because I believe that if we want an accessible startup ecosystem and furthermore an accessible society, it starts with the collective belief that the value of a business is more than the calculation of its bottom line. Today, a business is memorable for what it stands for. We should all be mission-driven, committed to facilitating the change that we believe in and wider inclusivity, because this is where the world is heading, and how exciting is that? Thank you.